But there's something about Van Gogh's legacy which is much more important than his fathering this or that ism of modern art. Vincent's passionate belief was that people wouldn't just see his pictures, but feel the rush of life in them.
Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. The original review I wrote for At Eternity's Gate was posted just less than a year ago. It was posted on March 13th, 2019 on crimerocket.com. I've been reviewing that particular analysis and I'm quite intrigued to see how my feelings have changed since writing it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take you through about the first 12 to 15 minutes of the movie, and then I'm going to, as in my response to it now, and then I'm going to take you through what I wrote kind of a year ago. So when the movie opens, there's sort of a voiceover, and I think that is a good opening. Let's listen to it right now.
I just want to be one of them. I would like to sit down with them and have a drink and talk about anything. I'd like them to give me some tobacco, a glass of wine, or even just ask me, "How are you today?" And I would answer, and we would talk.
I love the simplicity of the opening. I love the fact that it's rooted in his own words, and if you really want to get to know someone, use their own words. And in Van Gogh's case, there are so many words to use. There's such a reservoir of words to go through. There's a movie called Painted with Words, where the entire movie is scripted based on his own words in his letters, and that is probably the best story, the best, I guess, dramatization of Van Gogh. I don't think it's acted very well. I don't think Benedict Cumberbatch was the best actor for it, but I think that's a very authentic film in terms of the historical fact and the genuine feelings and what really happened in the artist's life. From this moment, the visual sort of opens on quite a watered down landscape. It's quite a diffuse landscape. If you've been to France, it's kind of surprising. It's surprising that it looks so less colorful, almost desaturated. It's less colorful than what it really is. It's kind of a jarring beginning, which I think is by design. Initially, in my first review, I thought this was a clever way of opening it to sort of disorientate you and so on. But on second thoughts, watching it again a year later, I don't think it was a very good opening. What I do appreciate, although I don't think this was necessarily the intention of the filmmaker, it could have been, but what I do appreciate was in this opening scene, you see Van Gogh approaching a woman walking on her own. I think she's a shepherdess, and he approaches her and in French asks her, can I draw your picture? And it's a little bit creepy, and she's a little bit creeped out, and that, I think, sums up the Van Gogh story actually very well. That's a dimension that's very unappreciated with Van Gogh, is Van Gogh the creep, Van Gogh the spurned lover, Van Gogh the dude who was unhappy in love, Van Gogh the guy who struggled with unrequited love. So that's certainly a dimension that is also very misunderstood and underestimated about him. And for me, it's such an important aspect that I'm considering writing a third book called The Mistresses of Vincent van Gogh. So depending on how well the second book does, I may be tempted to write specifically about that dimension in his life. And from there, the scene jumps to Paris, and it's kind of a situation where all the artists are gathered together. They're kind of a collective, and they're kind of in a restaurant. And while the artists are sort of arguing amongst themselves how they're going to make a living and look after one another, and sort of, have a, for the artists that are struggling, there's sort of a discussion about a communal fund where the artists who are successful put their earnings into kind of a pool, and that sort of pays for the artists who aren't successful. And of course, this isn't greeted with equal enthusiasm. And one of the most unenthusiastic responses to that is from Gogh, who's there. And so also what's ironic, I don't know whether this dramatization is rooted in fact, but I think it is nevertheless, it resonates with the real Gogh, I believe, which is that he was quite an abrasive fellow. He was quite confident. He was quite successful at the time. And so in the scenario, you have the Van Gogh brothers, Theo and Vincent, sitting in this sort of restaurant, and Gogh kind of makes a scene and stomps off. In other words, he's quite a confrontational guy. He's quite abrasive. He can rub you the wrong way. Now, you must bear that in mind when you think of Vincent, who's quite a quiet, modest guy, living with this confident, abrasive guy with sort of exotic tastes, right? So that was quite important to capture, and I thought that was captured quite well. What is also captured quite well in a very quick opening scene is you sort of see Van Gogh speaking to the owner, I guess, of the establishment, and the guy saying, "Can you just take all your pictures off the wall? Can you take this crap off the wall?" And he's basically revealing to us Van Gogh's lot in life is that he's not acknowledged, he's not respected, he's not getting anywhere in terms of his art, and he's struggling. And in the next scene, he sort of has all his pictures kind of in a wheelbarrow, and he's sort of alone going down a long downhill slope. And I think that's a great metaphor for what was about to happen. There's also a scene where Van Gogh leaves this restaurant and he goes and talks to Gogh, and you can kind of see how you have two separate artists who are both kind of have a vision for what they want to do, but Gogh is clearly the leader, the sort of visionary leader between the two. He's confident, he's quite well groomed, and so on. Van Gogh is well dressed, but you can kind of tell that he's down on his luck and he's sort of battered down. And Gogh kind of wryly mentions that, "Oh, well, it's quite nice that you've got a brother looking out for you. That can help." I'm not sure what to say about the casting in this movie. I'm not sure whether one wants to, because I think it's sometimes unfair to blame the casting for a movie that doesn't quite reach its potential. But I've got to say, I think that this movie could have been better cast. I don't think Willem Dafoe was the best actor for this, although I think given a better script, he could have done a lot with it. So I don't think it's the end of the world. I mean, he was a lot older than, I think he was 67, playing a 37-year-old. I could be wrong with that age, but basically much older than the artist. And the guy playing Gogh, sorry, I can't think of his name right now, but I think he's just too polished for the role. I also think he's just sort of too polished and nice. I think he needed to be a bit more exotic and rough around the edges. I think the way to answer the question is to say, well, if they shouldn't have been cast, who should have been cast? And I'm going to have to think about that, but I'd like to encourage you guys to think about it as well. And now I want to bring you to one of the best depictions I've ever seen, if not the best depiction I've ever seen in all the documentaries I've watched, in all the movie adaptations that I've watched. Obviously, this is a subjective view, and it's a very touchy-feely sort of response to everything. But the part that really stood out to me was a couple of minutes depicting the inside of Van Gogh's home in the Yellow House in Arles. It's a very atmospheric scene. You hear the wind blowing quite hard outside, called the Mistral. You can sort of see the twigs scratching kind of at the window outside as it's sort of blowing in the wind. You just get a sense of the atmosphere, of this wind blowing, and that is genuine. Just the wind in Arles is genuine. When I was in Arles, I was there for about a week. There were a couple of days where I wandered the streets of Arles alone at night, and the wind howled down those streets. And because of the way the streets are designed, they're like canyons with very old buildings. The wind really gushes down there like almost like tides of water. And they purposefully have designed the alleys that they curl and curve so that it's not like a highway for the wind. So in other words, so that the wind sort of buffets as it's being channeled through this maze of buildings. I also personally fought against this wind when I rode by mountain bike to Saint-Remy. So that wind is very real. I actually thought it wouldn't be a factor because I would be there sort of out of season, but I experienced it. And so you have this incredible moment where Van Gogh arrives to his room alone, closes the door, and doesn't say a word. And it's just him. And not much happens. He removes his shoes, and there's an excellent shot taken kind of from floor level of his shoes, of his socks. You can even see a toe protruding from a sock that has been worn through. And one of the reasons why this is such an authentic moment is every single day Van Gogh would get up and he would walk, and he would walk, and he would walk, and he would sort of go through the countryside to find something to paint. And then he would walk back. And I can tell you, as just a photojournalist, when I was traveling through Arles myself, and also through Auvers-sur-Oise, and through Paris, I walked everywhere. I don't think I caught a single taxi. Well, actually, I did catch a taxi in Auvers, but in Arles, I didn't catch a taxi. I could have taken a bus to Saint-Remy, but I elected to go, on my own steam. But the point being, I also walked everywhere. And although it's quite a compact little town, it is also an up and down town. And at the end of each day, I was also very leg tired. My feet also hurt. And, I wasn't painting, I was taking photos. But I came back from just repeating some of the routes that Van Gogh took. And I'm going to eventually introduce you to Arles. I'm going to show you the photos that I took when I was there. I want to do it sort of closer to May. But I will introduce you to these places and describe them to you. But for Van Gogh, that was something that was really, really true. And it's not just that this guy walked around. We know from his diaries that he sometimes walked considerable distances. When he lived in Ramsgate, he walked, I think in one case he walked something like 50 miles but just absurd distances that he walked. And the impression that you get from this was that he was incredibly physically fit, or physically strong in a way. Maybe not strong, but just he was getting exercise, put it that way. So the shoes that are also very battered and scuffed, and the socks are giving you this incredibly immediate sense of weariness and also of poverty. This is the room that he returns to is quite bare. There's not much furniture in it. It's a little bit dusty, and he sort of appears to be cold when he enters the room. He sort of unbuttons his coat, but then sort of blows on his hand, so it looks like he's quite cold, and he doesn't really have much to work with. He doesn't have that much resources, and so he sort of kicks off his shoes, suddenly looks at them, and then paints them. And that is, for me, an incredible scene, just capturing so eloquently the spirit of Van Gogh in that moment. I mean, that little bit of video is like a painting itself. It's just done very, very well filmed, well acted, well executed. Unfortunately, I've got to stop there and then say what happens next kind of ruins what has built up to it. And what happens next is Willem Dafoe then literally paints on the canvas. And although I appreciate this, I appreciate that there are so few films that actually dramatize the painting. I mean, this guy was a painter, so show him painting. But while I appreciate that effort, I think they should have had somebody paint like Van Gogh. In other words, use the techniques of Van Gogh, use the paint of Van Gogh, paint a picture like Van Gogh would do it. And instead you have Willem Dafoe executing an artwork nothing like the way Van Gogh paints. And, maybe an ordinary member of the public wouldn't mind that or wouldn't notice that. I don't know if that's the case. If you had to watch the film, you might say, no, well, that doesn't bother me. It bothers me just because I can sort of recognize that that's Willem Dafoe painting, not Van Gogh. The way Willem Dafoe is just doing whatever he's doing it's not really, I just didn't think that was very authentic. What made it even worse was the painting in the end doesn't even look anything like one of Van Gogh's paintings. In fact, I went to go and look for it and then I couldn't find it. Van Gogh did paint shoes in his sort of repertoire. I think he painted it a couple of times. But the way Willem Dafoe painted it, they just bear no resemblance to one another. And so in a sort of a weird way, the film kind of went downhill from here. And this is, as I say, the first 10, 12 minutes. The next scene sort of jumps to the countryside and you sort of see dead sunflowers. And again, I kind of get the idea Schnabel is trying to slap the viewer in the face saying, this is a different way of seeing Van Gogh's story. I'm not going to show you the sunflower with, the radiant yellow star. I'm going to show you a dead sunflower and kind of a field where they're all lying dead. And I don't know whether he's sort of trying to tell some symbolic story through that. But I found that irritating, and I felt progressively irritated when Schnabel just couldn't or wouldn't find or recreate the palette that Van Gogh painted. It was done so well in Loving Vincent. In Loving Vincent, his art is literally brought to life in like a oil painting animation. I don't know why. Anyway, Schnabel doesn't even attempt to do that. And there's virtually no yellow in the whole film. There's very little yellow in the whole film. There's very little color in the whole film. A lot of it is just desaturated and dull. And I found that first tedious and then very annoying. I just thought, how can you seriously make a film about one of the most colorful artists, both in terms of temperament and in terms of his work, and then fail to address the color aspect? So that wraps up my assessment now in 2020 of watching At Eternity's Gate. I'm going to come back to it to deal with the next part, which is dealing with his ear and some other scenes and sort of episodes in the film. But now I'm going to go to the blog that I wrote and just deal with the same section. I basically separated my review or my analysis into three sections: the good, the bad, and the ugly. And because of that, I was a bit hamstrung in how I was going to deal with each thing. So I think that is why there's a little bit of a distortion to what I said at the time. But anyway, I'm going to go to that now. So this is the good. The film opens with a black screen and Defoe talking simply, humanly, yet profoundly as Van Gogh. It rings true, and elements of his opening gambit, such as "I wish they would only take me as I am," resonate with words written in Van Gogh's letters to his brother Theo, dated 15 to 27 April 1882. So if you actually want to read the letter where that comes from, you can actually find it at the link on the blog post. So it's a good start. Using the artist's own words, and he wrote hundreds of letters in his life, is a smart way to achieve the authentic man through the authentic voice. It's been done before, of course, in the excellent Painted with Words film starring Benedict Cumberbatch. The first visual of the film is jarring, appropriately, throwing the viewer into a random farm field and the artist approaching a maid leading a flock of sheep. He approaches her and asks her if he can sketch her. She's confused by this, and so are we. The colors are washed out and desaturated, which suggests Van Gogh hasn't quite found his eye on his canvas just yet and needs to start seeing the world, well, differently. Jump to Paris and a difficult art crowd where Van Gogh still isn't well known and can't sell a damn thing. There we encounter Paul Gauguin, an artist who is better known in 1888 than Van Gogh, and is having better luck selling his wares to the same crowd. Even so, the two strike up an unlikely friendship. Naturally, it doesn't do Gauguin any harm that Vincent's brother is an art dealer. The next jump is to a windblown house in Arles, in the south of France. It's cold, and Van Gogh, forced to stay indoors, is getting stir-crazy. He removes his shoes, and we're offered a floor-eye view of his flea-bitten socks with toes poking out of holes. This is far and away the most authentic moment in the whole film, because more than painting or writing letters, Van Gogh was a rambler. Every scene he painted he walked to, and he walked a lot. When he lived in London as a youth, he rambled from London to Brighton, a distance of 53 miles. On another occasion, he walked over 80 miles from London to Ramsgate. It's also the depiction of Van Gogh doing his thing that feels real. The glint of the oils on the palette, the sound of the brush lightly scratching on the canvas, the way the white canvas begins to fill up almost magically with those boots on the floor. But this is where the first signs of trouble creep in. The boots are based on reality, and the photography isn't a bad match for the painting. The problem is the art that is created on camera looks nothing like the painting Van Gogh executed, a detail one would expect more care and consideration in a biopic about a world-famous artist and how he sees the world. Since Willem Dafoe fancies himself as something of an artist, this may be license taken or given by the director to give him free rein to interpret Van Gogh. Well, fine, to each his own, but as misinterpretations go, this one isn't little. It's also quite vulgar. It doesn't look or feel anything like Van Gogh, like a Van Gogh you've ever seen, and that's a problem. It's a shame because the optics and atmosphere of everything else is just about right. It's just the most important thing, how he looks and represents his boots on the floor, that are misrepresented. As a freelance photojournalist who wrote a series of articles on artists and went out into the field to find the landscapes they painted, including of my own great-grandfather, the Dutch artist Tinus de Jong, I found this clumsy approach to Van Gogh's work inaccurate and thus unacceptable. Of the three legs to Van Gogh's story, At Eternity's Gate gets the most important part right, the law, the basic stuff, the look and feel. To be fair, that shouldn't be hard to do. It requires simply placing the artist where we know he was and contextualizing the art we know he painted with real places. Incredibly, At Eternity's Gate begins this process but leaves out all the seminal works Van Gogh painted, from Starry Night, painted at the Asylum of Saint-Remy, to Wheatfield with Crows, painted just prior to his death in Auvers. Why? So, one area that I kind of disagree with in terms of this article is just that he doesn't really capture the look and feel, except for that first scene in his home. And what that scene captures is the loneliness. It captures the silence of an artist. It captures Van Gogh's lot. Now I want to take you back to that opening monologue where Van Gogh says something like he wants to be one of them. He wants to... If you think about those words and you think about what we dealt with in his letter to his mother and his sister recently, he said exactly that. He kind of said that, he doesn't feel like the review really reflects him. It's more in line with, I guess, Monticelli and Gogh. And so he kind of is aspiring to be an artist, but then when he was being recognized as one, he didn't recognize that, if that makes sense. So he's trying very hard to be recognized, but I guess in his own way. And one could argue he was trying too hard, or he's trying to rush that whole process. But one thing that he felt very strongly was he wanted to be part of that collective. And I think that is why his loneliness and his isolation and his exclusion from that hurt him quite a lot. I think he was a guy who wanted to be more social. He wanted to be kind of part of a family, part of a collective. And that's actually why I went to Arles to start an art studio in the South. The whole idea was to be with other artists and to sort of, do you know what I mean? Like have a social group experience, creating things, to start kind of a movement. And in the end, he achieved all that kind of on his own. I mean, he achieved his legacy, he achieved his whatever, he achieved his imminence on his own. And maybe that is why his work is so powerful. So I'm not going to take things further than that. I'm not done with this review of At Eternity's Gate, but I will return to the same movie to deal with how the movie interprets the ear narrative. And that'll be the second sort of analysis in this little series within the series. And then I'll come back for the third and final installment, where we'll look at how the movie deals with his death. And then we will look at other films, including films about Gogh. So thank you for listening. If you're enjoying this series, please subscribe, tell other people about it, like, share on Twitter, share on Facebook. You can also share on WhatsApp, whatever. But please do share and spread the word, and I'll see you guys next time.